The morning sun barely touched the estate's marble steps when the small figure appeared. Blonde braids slightly messy from sleep, pink and purple backpack clutched tight, school uniform, crisp but worn. She stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, eyes wide, scared, searching. She stopped in front of him. The man her mother warned her never to disturb. The man with tattoos crawling up his neck like dark secrets. The man whose name made even police captains check their words twice. A mafia boss. Luca Marchetti was stepping out of his black Mercedes when she tugged his expensive suit jacket. "Mr. Marchetti, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "Can you please walk me to school today? I don't feel safe anymore." His entire security team froze. His driver Marco's hand stopped mid-reach for the car door. Even the estate gardener trimming hedges 30 feet away seemed to stop breathing. No one approached Luca Marchetti like this. People asked him for mercy or favors they'd spend years repaying, for forgiveness for mistakes that usually ended in shallow graves, but never this. Never protection. Never from a child who should have been invisible. He knelt slowly, his tattooed hands folded in front of him, his voice low and careful. "Why aren't you safe, little one?" The girl Haley hesitated, her small fingers gripping her backpack straps tighter. Then she pointed across the street, past the estate's iron gates. A man stood watching her from beside a parked van, hands buried in his pockets. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile that made children's instincts scream danger. Luca's own pulse ticked once, sharp and cold, because he recognized that stance, that predatory stillness. Antonio Corelli's network, a trafficker, a predator who'd been testing the boundaries of his territory. A man who saw children not as innocents but as inventory. Haley's voice broke the silence again, small but brave. "I just want to get to school today without him following me anymore." Behind them, Aaliyah Thompson rushed out, her maid's uniform still being straightened, horror written across her face. "Haley, I'm so sorry, Mr. Marchetti." She didn't mean to. But Luca raised one hand, silencing her without looking away from the little girl. The maid's daughter, 8 years old. Standing where she had no right to stand, asking what she had no right to ask. And yet here she was, choosing courage over invisibility because fear had finally outweighed every social boundary her mother had taught her to respect. The mafia boss stood up, and what he did next in broad daylight on the steps of his own estate, in front of his crew and the watching predator across the street, would shatter every unspoken rule between employer and employee, between the powerful and the powerless, and start a war that would force him to choose between his empire and his soul. Stay with me until the end, because the truth behind that little girl's courage and the boss's decision will leave you speechless. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Her name was Haley Thompson, 8 years old, daughter of Aaliyah Thompson, who'd worked as a maid in Luca Marchetti's estate for 3 years. Born into a world where children of service workers learn to be invisible, to speak only when spoken to never ask the powerful for anything. Where mothers taught their daughters that survival meant knowing your place, and that place was always in the background, always quiet, always grateful for whatever scraps of security came your way. Haley lived with her mother in the modest staff quarters behind the main mansion, where the marble floors gave way to simple tile, where the grand chandeliers became basic bulbs, where the world of wealth stopped at a very clear line. Aaliyah worked 12-hour days keeping that mansion perfect, polishing floors that cost more than a year of her salary, arranging flowers in vases worth more than her monthly rent, serving guests who never learned her name. But for 3 weeks, Haley had been telling her mother about the man, the one who waited near the school gates every morning, the one who followed her down the 6 blocks between the estate and Jefferson Elementary, the one who knew her name even though she'd never, ever spoken to him, who smiled at her with eyes that made her stomach hurt, who was getting bolder each day, coming closer, lingering longer. Aaliyah had reported it to the police 5 times. 5 times, Officer Martinez had taken notes, nodded sympathetically, and explained that without evidence of actual contact or threats, they couldn't investigate. "Children have active imaginations, Miss Thompson," he'd said, not unkindly but firmly. "Sometimes they misinterpret friendly adults in the neighborhood." The subtext was clear in his eyes, in his tone. Asterisk. A maid's concerns don't carry the same weight as others. Come back when something actually happens. Asterisk. But Haley knew what she saw. The man wasn't friendly. He was hunting. And every morning, the hunt got bolder, got closer, got more dangerous. And this morning, fear had finally given her a courage that social boundaries couldn't contain anymore. Haley Thompson had learned the rules of invisibility before she learned to read. Rule 1. Never make eye contact with Mr. Marchetti or his associates. Rule 2. If you see something happening in the main house, you saw nothing. Rule 3. Speak only when spoken to, and even then, keep your answers short and polite. Rule 4. The most important. Never, ever ask the man who owned everything for anything. Her mother Aaliyah had drilled these lessons into her with the fierce desperation of someone who knew exactly how fragile their security was. "We're lucky to be here, baby," she'd whisper while braiding Haley's hair each morning in their small quarters. "Lucky to have a roof over our heads, food on our table. Mr. Marchetti pays fair wages, never touches the staff inappropriately, never raises his voice. That's rare in our world. So we stay quiet. We stay grateful. We stay invisible." Invisible. That's what Haley had been for 3 years, moving through the estate like a ghost. She'd perfected the art of pressing herself against walls when Mr. Marchetti walked past, of looking down at her shoes when his men gathered in the foyer, of becoming so small and silent that people forgot she existed at all. But invisibility only worked inside the estate walls. 6 blocks away, at Jefferson Elementary School, Haley was visible. Too visible. For 3 weeks, she'd felt his eyes on her. The man with the van and the smile that never reached his eyes. At first, she thought maybe her mother was right about her imagination. Maybe she was seeing danger where there was only coincidence. But then he started appearing at different locations along her route. By the school gates in the morning, near the corner store where she sometimes bought candy with her allowance, outside the estate gates when she returned home, always watching, always smiling, never approaching, but getting closer each day, like he was testing boundaries, measuring her fear. Last week he'd spoken to her, just 2 words as she hurried past. "Hello, Haley." She'd never told him her name. That night, she'd told her mother everything. Voice shaking, tears streaming. Aaliyah had held her tight and promised to make it stop. She'd gone to the police station after her shift, still in her maid's uniform, and filed a report with Officer Martinez. "Has this man touched your daughter, Miss Thompson?" "No, but threatened her directly?" "He knows her name when she's never—" Children have active imaginations. Sometimes they misinterpret friendly gestures from adults in the neighborhood. Without evidence of actual criminal behavior, there's nothing we can investigate. Aaliyah had gone back 4 more times. 4 more variations of the same dismissal. The officer's eyes always lingered on her uniform, on her calloused hands, on the address she gave staff quarters, not the main residence. His message was clear without him ever saying it directly. People like you don't get the same protection as people like them. But this morning, when Haley looked out their small window and saw the man standing across from the estate gates, not hiding anymore, not pretending, just standing there waiting for her like a spider in its web, she made a choice that broke every rule she'd ever been taught. Some things were more terrifying than breaking rules. Some things were worth risking everything for, even if it meant approaching the one man her mother feared more than any predator on the street. The morning of October 18th began with the sound of her mother coughing. Not the polite, covered-mouth cough Aaliyah used when she was trying to hide being sick. This was deep, rattling, the kind that shook her whole body and left her gasping for breath. Haley found her in their tiny kitchenette, already dressed in her uniform despite the fever flush on her dark skin, despite the way she had to grip the counter to stay upright. A pot of oatmeal sat forgotten on the stove, barely touched. "Mama, you're sick." "I'm fine, baby." Aaliyah's voice was hoarse, unconvincing. "Just a little cold. We need to get you to school. And I have to prepare for tonight's dinner party. Senator Baldini is coming. And Mrs. Chen needs help with another coughing fit cut her off." Haley watched her mother struggle to breathe and felt something shift inside her chest. Aaliyah Thompson had never missed a day of work in 3 years. Not when she had the stomach flu. Not when she'd sprained her ankle on the estate's back stairs. Not even when Haley had been hospitalized with pneumonia last winter. Because missing work meant being replaceable, and being replaceable meant losing everything. "I'll walk myself today, Mama." The words came out before Haley could second-guess them. "You rest." I promise I'll go straight there and straight back. Aaliyah's fevered eyes filled with tears. Baby, no. That man. I'll be fast. I'll stay where there's people. Haley was already grabbing her backpack, already pushing her mother toward their small bedroom. Please, Mama, you need to sleep. Aaliyah was too weak to argue. She let Haley guide her to bed, let her daughter pull the thin blanket up to her chin. Straight there, straight back, she whispered. And if you see him, you run. You run and you scream and you, I will, I promise. But when Haley stepped out of the staff quarters into the cool morning air, adjusting her backpack straps with trembling hands, she saw him immediately. He wasn't hiding anymore. He stood directly across from the estate gates, leaning against his van like he owned the street, like he'd been waiting specifically for her. When their eyes met, his smile widened. Not the smile of someone being friendly, the smile of someone who'd finally cornered their prey. Haley's feet refused to move. Her breath caught in her throat. The 6 blocks to school stretched out before her, like 6 miles, every shadow a potential hiding place, every corner a trap. She could run back inside, wake her sick mother, make Aaliyah choose between her job and her daughter's safety one more time. Or she could scream. But who would hear? Who would care? A maid's daughter screaming about a man who was just standing on a public street, smiling? The rumble of an engine broke through her paralysis. A black Mercedes pulled up to the estate's main entrance, chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Luca Marchetti stepped out, phone to his ear, already talking business. His driver Marco moved to open the rear door, preparing for whatever meeting or deal or dangerous thing the boss had scheduled for the day. Haley's heart hammered against her ribs. Every lesson her mother had taught her screamed at her to stay still, stay quiet, stay invisible. Mr. Marchetti didn't even know her name. She was nothing to him. Less than nothing. Just the daughter of the woman who cleaned his floors. But then she remembered something Aaliyah had said once, late at night when she thought Haley was sleeping. She'd been talking to Mrs. Chen from the kitchen staff, their voices low and careful. Mr. Marchetti is dangerous, yes, ruthless, but he has rules, strange rules. I heard he once killed a man for hitting a child. Said his mother taught him innocents are sacred, especially children. Haley looked at the predator across the street, then at the Mafia boss adjusting his cufflinks. She made her choice. Hey, quick pause, can I be real with you for a second? If you're enjoying this video so far, I need your help. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the year ends. And I'm not going to lie, every single subscription matters to me right now. It's not just a number. It's proof that what I'm creating is actually reaching people and making a difference. So if this content is adding value to your day, if you're finding it helpful or entertaining, please take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. It would genuinely mean the world to me. All right, let's get back to it. Luca Marchetti had built his empire on reading people within seconds of meeting them. 15 years of surviving in a world where hesitation meant death had sharpened his instincts to razor precision. He could spot a liar at 50 paces, identify an undercover cop by the way they held their coffee, predict betrayal before the traitor had even fully formed the thought. So when the small blonde girl in the worn school uniform appeared at his car door, hand reaching for his jacket, he knew 3 things immediately. She was terrified. She had no idea what she was risking, and whatever had driven her to break every social boundary that governed her world was serious enough to kill for. Mr. Marchetti, sir, she whispered, her voice trembling but determined. Can you please walk me to school today? I don't feel safe anymore. The world stopped. Marco's hand froze on the car door. His phone call died mid-sentence. Even the estate's security team, trained to react to threats with lethal efficiency, simply stared in stunned silence. Because this didn't happen. Children didn't approach Luca Marchetti. The help's children certainly didn't touch him. And no one, absolutely no one asked him for protection like he was some kind of guardian angel, instead of the man whose name made prosecutors reconsider their career choices. Haley, Aaliyah Thompson burst from the staff quarters, still in her nightgown, fever-bright eyes wide with horror. She stumbled across the driveway, reaching for her daughter. Oh God, Mr. Marchetti, I'm so sorry. She didn't mean to bother you. She knows better. Please forgive. But Luca wasn't looking at the mother. His eyes had locked on the man across the street, the one leaning against a gray van with tinted windows. the one whose smile had disappeared the moment Haley approached the Mercedes. The one whose posture Luca recognized because he'd been studying Antonio Corelli's organization for 6 months, ever since they'd started operating at the edges of his territory. Traffickers. Child traffickers specifically, with a network stretching from here to Eastern Europe. Corelli had approached him twice through intermediaries, proposing partnerships, shared territory, mutual profit. Both times, Luca had sent the messengers back missing fingers. Some money came with a price too high to pay. And now one of Corelli's hunters was standing 50 feet from his estate, bold as brass, targeting a child who lived under his roof. The disrespect alone was worth killing for. The implication that Luca's territory was weak enough, his reputation soft enough, that predators could hunt here without consequence that was worth a war. But it was the little girl's face that made his decision. She looked up at him with eyes that held the same terror he'd seen once before, 29 years ago, reflected in his mother's eyes as she threw herself between him and a rival family's bullets. He'd been 9 years old, small for his age, too innocent to understand why people wanted him dead just because of the name he carried. His mother had taken 3 bullets to the chest. She'd died in his arms on their kitchen floor, blood soaking into the yellow dress she'd worn to his school play. Her last words, whispered through lips already turning blue. "Protect the innocent, Luca. Promise me. Don't become the monster they think you are. Promise me." He'd made that promise while she took her last breath. He'd kept it too, in his own way. Children were untouchable in his organization. Human trafficking was a line he'd never cross. Anyone who harmed innocents in his territory answered to him personally. Rules of engagement be damned. Time to remind Corelli why those rules existed. Luca gently moved Aaliyah aside and knelt down to Haley's level, his expensive suit touching the dusty driveway. He took her small hand in his tattooed one. "Show me who's been following you, Piccola." The moment Luca Marchetti's hand closed around Haley's, the neighborhood began to wake up in ways that had nothing to do with the rising sun. Mrs. Chen paused mid-motion while opening her bakery, flour-dusted hands frozen on the door handle, watching the impossible scene unfold. Mr. Rodriguez stepped out of his corner store, coffee forgotten, eyes wide. Windows opened along the street, second floor, third floor, the apartments above the laundromat. Curtains parted, faces appeared, because what they were witnessing defied every law of their world. Luca Marchetti didn't walk children to school. Luca Marchetti didn't hold hands with little girls in worn uniforms. Luca Marchetti certainly didn't protect the daughter of his maid, while his security team flanked them like she was visiting royalty instead of an 8-year-old who lived in staff quarters. But there he was, tattooed and dangerous in his $3,000 suit, walking slowly to match a child's shorter stride, listening intently as she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "He's always there in the morning," Haley said, pointing ahead without looking directly at the man who'd started following them at a careful distance. "By the blue mailbox first. Then he moves to the school gates. Sometimes he talks on his phone, but he never stops watching." Luca's jaw tightened. The predator was maintaining surveillance distance, close enough to intimidate, far enough to claim innocence. Professional. "How long has this been happening?" 3 weeks. Mama went to the police 5 times. Haley's small fingers squeezed his hand tighter. "They said she was imagining things because because your complaints don't carry the same weight as others," Luca finished quietly. The ugly truth laid bare. He pulled out his phone, never breaking stride. "Marco." "Boss?" His lieutenant's voice came through immediately. "I need background checks on every adult male who's been seen near Jefferson Elementary in the past month. Prioritize anyone asking questions about children's schedules, anyone watching the gates, anyone driving vehicles suitable for transport. I want names, addresses, known associates, and criminal histories on my desk within 2 hours." "Understood. Anything else?" "Contact Greco at the estate. Aaliyah Thompson's accommodations are being upgraded immediately. Staff housing, Section B, the renovated wing. Full health coverage, dental, the whole package. Make it happen before she finishes her shift today." He ended that call and dialed another. "Captain Mendoza." A pause, then a careful voice. "Mr. Marchetti, what can I do for you? There's a credible threat against children in Sector 7. I'm texting you a description and license plate right now. I suggest you investigate properly this time, instead of dismissing concerned mothers because of their tax brackets." "Now wait a minute." I have the recordings of Officer Martinez's 5 conversations with Miss Thompson. Would you like me to forward them to the mayor's office? Or perhaps the local news station? I'm sure they'd love to hear how your department handles child safety reports from working-class families. Silence. Then, we'll look into it immediately. Luca pocketed his phone. They were 4 blocks from school now. Haley hadn't let go of his hand. Mr. Marchetti? Her voice was small, confused. Why are you helping me? Mama says important people don't help people like us. She says we're lucky if they just don't notice us. Luca stopped walking. He knelt again, right there on the sidewalk, ignoring the cameras he knew were recording this moment, ignoring the witnesses gathering, ignoring everything except the little girl who'd been brave enough to ask a monster for protection. Your mama is wrong about something, Piccola, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Power that doesn't protect the innocent is just cruelty with better clothes. I have power. Real power. And if I don't use it to keep children like you safe, then what's the point? I'm just another predator in an expensive suit. Haley's eyes went wide. Then impossibly she smiled. You talk like my mama when she thinks I'm asleep. She says you're scary but not mean. Your mama is very wise. By 6 o'clock that evening, photographs of Luca Marchetti walking hand in hand with a small blonde girl had circulated through every criminal network in the city. Digital copies, printed copies, copies analyzed and discussed in back rooms and warehouses and offices where legitimate business ended and darker enterprises began. Antonio Corelli spread 3 of the clearest images across his desk, like tarot cards predicting someone's future. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled, a smile playing at his lips that would have made Haley's instincts scream. Marchetti's going soft, he said to the 4 men gathered in his warehouse office. 15 years of being untouchable, and now he's playing bodyguard to the help's kid. Victor Slade, Corelli's lieutenant, picked up one photo Luca kneeling on the sidewalk, looking at Haley with something almost like tenderness. It's worse than soft. He's emotionally invested. That makes him predictable, vulnerable. Exactly. Corelli tapped the image. For 6 months, he's been blocking our expansion into his territory, refusing partnerships, turning down profitable deals because of his so-called principles about innocence and children. He spat the words like curses. But now we know his weakness. He cares, and men who care can be manipulated. Danny Costa, the youngest in the room, shifted uncomfortably. Boss, this is Marchetti we're talking about. He's killed men for less than what you're suggesting. He's killed men who threatened his business, Corelli corrected. But this isn't business, this is personal. That's the point. We grab the girl tomorrow morning. Quick, clean, before he can react. We'll send him a message. Sentiment is a liability he can't afford. And then what? Victor asked. Then we negotiate. He backs off our operations, gives us 3 territories, and maybe we give him back the girl unharmed. We prove that his protection means nothing when we decide to act. The men around the table nodded, convinced. This was the play. This was how you toppled a king. Find what he cares about and threaten to destroy it. What none of them knew was that their entire conversation was being recorded. 3 blocks away, in an apartment Luca had purchased under a shell company 6 months ago, Marco sat with headphones on, listening to every word. The listening device had been planted during a routine inspection of Corelli's warehouse, a fire marshal's visit that Luca had arranged, complete with legitimate inspector credentials and a very cooperative inspector who understood the value of looking the other way, while structural assessments were conducted. Marco's phone was already dialing before Corelli finished outlining his plan. Boss, they're moving tomorrow morning, 8:15, between the estate and the school. Victor Slade and 2 others. They're planning to grab Haley, use her as leverage. There was a pause on the other end. When Lucas spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Let them try. Sir? You heard me, Marco. Let them come. But I want every available man in position by 7 a.m. Undercover. Neighbors, shopkeepers, utility workers. I want that 6-block radius saturated with our people pretending to be civilians. When Slade makes his move, I want witnesses everywhere. Good witnesses. The kind that make police investigations very straightforward. Understood. What about the girl? Triple her protection, but make it invisible. I don't want Corelli spooked. Let him think he has the advantage right up until the moment he realizes he's walked into a trap. Marco allowed himself a grim smile. This is going to start a war, boss. The war started the moment one of his hunters stood outside my estate, stalking a child under my protection. Luca's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Tomorrow we just make it official. But after he ended the call, Luca stood at his office window, looking out over the city lights, and allowed himself a moment of brutal honesty. Corelli would fail tomorrow. The kidnapping attempt would be thwarted. But men like Corelli didn't accept failure quietly. They escalated. They retaliated. They made examples. And there were dozens of children in this city without a mafia boss protecting them. The war was just beginning, and Luca knew exactly how much blood it would cost before it ended. Aaliyah woke to sunlight streaming through windows that shouldn't exist in her cramped quarters. She blinked, disoriented, still fever-foggy, and realized she wasn't in her small room anymore. The space was 3 times larger. Clean walls painted a warm cream. New furniture, a real bed with a proper headboard, a small living area with a couch, a kitchenette with modern appliances. Medical supplies sat on the counter. Fever reducers, cough medicine, antibiotics, even a thermometer still in its package. A handwritten note rested on the nightstand in precise, masculine script. Your daughter's courage inspired this. You both deserve better. LM. Aaliyah's hands trembled as she held the note. She'd worked for 3 years in these quarters, never complaining, never asking for anything beyond her wages. And in one morning, because her daughter had been brave enough to ask for help, everything had changed. She found Haley already dressed for school, backpack ready, standing by the window watching the street below. Mama, there are a lot of people outside today. That morning, when Luca Marchetti's Mercedes pulled up to the estate gates, he wasn't alone. 8 of his men flanked him, visible and armed. But something else had happened overnight. Something that made even Marco raise his eyebrows in surprise. The neighborhood had woken up. Mrs. Chen stood outside her bakery with a tray of fresh pastries and a determined expression. Mr. Rodriguez positioned himself on the corner, arms crossed, watching. Parents walked their children to school earlier than usual, forming small clusters along the route to Jefferson Elementary. The usual morning emptiness had been replaced by presence, deliberate, purposeful presence. Word had spread, not through official channels, but through the whisper network that connected every working family in the neighborhood. Luca Marchetti was protecting one of their own. And if the most powerful man in the city thought their children were worth defending, maybe they should act like it too. At 8:15 exactly, Victor Slade and 2 men emerged from a parked van 3 blocks from the school. Their plan was simple: grab the girl during the narrow window between estate and school, throw her in the van, disappear into traffic before anyone could react. But when they moved toward Haley, walking hand in hand with Luca, something impossible happened. Mrs. Chen stepped directly into their path, holding her pastry tray like a shield. Excuse me, gentlemen. Can I offer you something? You look like you're in the wrong neighborhood. Mr. Rodriguez appeared at Victor's left shoulder. Yes, definitely lost. School is that way. Are you fathers? I don't recognize you from the PTA meetings. More neighbors materialized. Not threatening, not armed, just present, creating a human wall between the predators and their prey, with nothing but their bodies and their willingness to be seen. Victor's hand moved toward his waistband, but froze when he realized what he was seeing. 20 people. 30. Parents with children. Shopkeepers. Office workers. Heading to their morning shifts. All stopping. All watching. All positioned between him and the target. This is our neighborhood, Mrs. Chen said quietly. Her accent thick, but her words crystal clear. These are our children. The sound of sirens cut through the morning air. 2 police cruisers pulled up, lights flashing. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons, responding to an anonymous tip about a suspected kidnapping attempt, complete with vehicle descriptions, license plate numbers, and photographs of the suspects. Captain Mendoza himself stepped forward. Victor Slade, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about your activities in this area. As Victor was led away in handcuffs, his 2 associates following, Luca turned to address the crowd that had gathered. His voice carried across the street, and for once, the fear people usually felt when he spoke was absent, replaced by something else. Something like respect. This, he said simply, gesturing to the neighbors who'd stood their ground, is what happens when a community decides to protect its own. Thank you. The courier arrived at 2:47 p.m., professional and anonymous in a nondescript uniform, delivering a manila envelope with no return address. Marco signed for it, his instincts already screaming wrong before he'd even opened the seal. Inside were 4 school photographs. Standard 8 by 10s, the kind parents bought every year and displayed on mantels and refrigerators. Except these had been marked with red X's, violent slashes across smiling children's faces. 7-year-old Miguel Santos from Street Augustine Elementary. Taken from the playground at 1:15 p.m., 9-year-old Chen Li from Riverside Academy. Vanished during dismissal at 2 p.m. 6-year-old Isabella Torres from Holy Trinity School. Last seen in the parking lot at 2:20 p.m. 10-year-old Marcus Williams from Northside Elementary. Disappeared walking home at 2:35 p.m. 4 children, 4 different schools, 4 neighborhoods where Luca Marchetti had no presence, no influence, no ability to intervene, all taken within 90 minutes of Victor Slade's arrest. The message scrawled on the back of each photo was identical, written in elegant script that spoke of education and calculation. You saved 1, we took 4. You can't protect them all, Marchetti. But it was the 5th photograph that made Marco's blood turn to ice. Haley Thompson, smiling in her school picture from last year, blonde braids neat, eyes bright. Someone had drawn crosshairs over her face in red ink. The message on this one was different. Tomorrow, the maid's daughter pays for your arrogance. Marco was already moving toward Luca's office when Aaliyah's scream echoed through the estate. She'd been bringing afternoon tea service when she'd seen the photos spread across Marco's desk. The tray crashed to the marble floor, porcelain shattering as her knees gave out. Oh God, oh God, no, this is my fault. I should never have let her ask you for help. Those children, those poor children, because of us, because of Haley. Mama! Haley ran from the staff quarters, drawn by her mother's anguish. She saw the photos, saw the red X's, and her young face went pale. But she didn't cry. Instead, she knelt beside her mother with a composure that shouldn't exist in an 8-year-old. No, Mama, this isn't your fault. It's his fault. Her voice was steady, certain. The bad man who takes children. Not you. Not me. Not Mr. Marchetti. Luca had arrived by then, his face a mask of cold fury as he took in the scene. 4 missing children. 4 families destroyed. All because he dared to protect one little girl who'd asked him for help. Haley looked up at him, her hand still holding her mother's, and in her eyes was something that nearly broke him. Absolute, unwavering trust. You're going to stop him, right, Mr. Marchetti? You're going to find those kids and bring them home? The weight of that trust was heavier than any debt he'd ever carried, more binding than any oath he'd ever sworn. 4 children he'd never met, taken because he'd made Corelli look weak. 4 families who'd done nothing except live in neighborhoods where the wrong predator operated. This was the price of protection. This was what happened when you drew a line in the sand against men who saw human beings as commodities. They didn't retreat. They escalated. They made you choose between the one you'd promised to protect and the many you hadn't. Except Luca, Marchetti had never been good at accepting impossible choices. He knelt beside Haley, meeting her eyes with the same honesty he'd shown that first morning. Yes, Piccola, I'm going to find them. All of them. And I'm going to make sure this never happens again. Promise? He thought of his mother's last words, of the promise he'd made 29 years ago, of the little girl in front of him who'd been brave enough to ask a monster for help and kind enough to believe he could be more than what he was. I promise. Marco laid out the brutal mathematics of impossible choices on Luca's desk like a coroner performing an autopsy. Maps marked with red circles, resource allocations, personnel deployments, numbers that didn't lie. We can't do both, boss. His voice was steady, professional, the voice of a man who'd made hard decisions before. We don't have the manpower to fortify the estate and conduct a citywide search for 4 missing children. Corelli knows this. That's why he did it. Force us to choose. The smart play is fortress protection around Haley and Aaliyah. Lock down the estate. Let the police handle the kidnappings. We keep our promise to the one we can actually protect. Luca stared at the photographs. Miguel Santos, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile in his school picture. Chen Li, 9, wearing glasses too big for her small face. Isabella Torres, 6, with ribbons in her dark hair. Marcus Williams, 10, serious expression like he was already carrying the weight of his neighborhood's expectations. 4 children he'd never met. 4 families who'd never asked him for anything. 4 lives hanging in the balance because he dared to walk one little girl to school. Through his office window, he could see Haley helping her mother to the couch in their new quarters, bringing water, speaking in that calm voice that shouldn't belong to a child who just learned she had a target on her back. Marco followed his gaze. She's safe here, boss. We can keep her safe. But those other kids? They're in 4 different locations by now, maybe already out of the city. This is a losing battle. Don't throw away what you can protect, trying to save what you can't. It was the smart play, the logical play, the play that every rule of organized crime said he should make. Protect your own. Cut your losses. Don't let emotion override strategy. Luca thought of his mother, yellow dress soaking red, whispering her last words with blood on her lips. Protect the innocent, Luca. Promise me. He'd been 9 years old. One child. The only child she could save. But he wasn't 9 anymore. He wasn't powerless. He was Luca Marchetti, and he controlled half this city's infrastructure, a quarter of its political apparatus, and enough resources to wage a war that would reshape the entire criminal landscape. Then we make the resources, he said quietly. Marco blinked. Sir? Quadruple security around Haley and Aaliyah. I want this estate locked down like a military installation. But also mobilize everyone, and I mean everyone. Every associate, every contact, every debt we're owed, every favor outstanding. Pull people from the docks, the construction sites, the gambling operations. I don't care if business stops for a week. We're finding those children. Boss, this goes against every rule of organized crime. Yes, I know. Luca stood, his decision crystallizing into certainty. Get me addresses for the families. All 4. An hour later, Luca Marchetti walked into Miguel Santos's small apartment in the barrio, where the boy's mother sat surrounded by useless police officers and helpless neighbors. He came alone. No guards, no weapons, no displays of power. Just a man in an expensive suit with tattoos on his neck and guilt in his eyes. Mrs. Santos, my name is Luca Marchetti. I'm here to help find your son. She looked up through swollen eyes. Help? You're the reason he's gone. Everyone knows Corelli took those children because of you. The accusation landed like a blade between his ribs because it was true. You're right, he said simply. This is my fault, which is why I will bring Miguel home. No payment, no debt. This is my responsibility. He knelt before her, this grieving mother in her tiny apartment, and made the same promise he'd made to Haley. Then he visited Chen Li's family, Isabella Torres's family, Marcus Williams's family. Each time, he knelt. Each time, he promised. That evening, in a neighborhood square crowded with frightened parents and curious onlookers, Luca made a public declaration that shattered every tradition of organized crime. Any child in this territory is now under my protection. If you see something suspicious, call these numbers. He held up cards with contact information. No retaliation, no cost, no conditions. Your children's safety is not negotiable. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Why should we trust you?" Luca met the speaker's eyes. Because a brave little girl trusted me first, and I refused to prove her wrong. The first tip came at 11:47 p.m. from a janitor who'd seen suspicious activity at an abandoned textile factory on the east side. He'd never reported anything to police before people in his position learned early that getting involved meant risking everything. But he'd heard Luca Marchetti's promise in the square. He'd seen the photos of the missing children. And he'd decided that some things mattered more than staying invisible. The second tip came 20 minutes later from a night nurse who'd noticed a man buying unusual quantities of children's medication at an all-night pharmacy. The third from a delivery driver who'd seen a gray van with tinted windows, the same van from the surveillance photos parked behind a warehouse in Sector 9. Suddenly, people were talking. The same community that had learned to see nothing, hear nothing, say nothing was finding its voice because one little girl had found hers first. By 3 a.m., Marco had triangulated the location. A warehouse complex on the industrial waterfront, technically outside Luca's territory but close enough. 4 heat signatures on the thermal imaging. Small bodies, not moving much. The raid happened at dawn, a complicated alliance between Luca's organization and Captain Mendoza's tactical unit. The kind of cooperation that would never appear in any official report, but got results when the system's usual channels moved too slowly. Miguel Santos emerged first, scared but unharmed, running into his mother's arms. Then, Chen Li, Isabella Torres, and Marcus Williams, 4 children who'd been gone for 18 hours, but felt like 18 years to their families. Antonio Corelli was arrested trying to flee through a back exit. His network, built on fear and secrecy, crumbled the moment people stopped being afraid to speak. Victor Slade turned evidence in exchange for a lighter sentence. Names, locations, bank accounts, everything needed to dismantle an operation that had been operating in the shadows for 5 years. 3 days later, at a community meeting in the same square where Luca had made his promise, Aaliyah Thompson did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. She stood up. "My name is Aaliyah Thompson," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I'm a maid. I clean Mr. Marchetti's estate. Nobody listens to maids. We're supposed to be invisible, grateful, quiet. But my daughter was braver than me. When she was scared, she asked for help. When I was scared, I stayed silent." She looked around at the faces, watching her faces like hers. Working people, invisible people. If an 8-year-old girl can find the courage to speak up, what's our excuse? If she can do that, we all can. The applause started slowly, then built like thunder. That same week, Luca established the Marchetti Foundation for Child Safety, funded by his legitimate construction and shipping businesses, staffed by former social workers and retired police officers who actually cared. A phone line that was answered 24/7. Resources for families. Pressure on authorities to take reports seriously regardless of who filed them. 2 weeks after that first morning, Luca walked Haley to school again. But this time, they weren't alone. Dozens of children walked with him. Miguel Santos holding his mother's hand, Chen Li chattering with her friends, Isabella Torres skipping ahead with ribbons in her hair, Marcus Williams walking tall like he knew he was safe. Aaliyah walked too, head high, no longer invisible but seen, really seen. At the school gates, Haley looked up at Luca with those serious eyes that had started everything. "Mr. Marchetti? Are the bad men all gone now?" "The ones who were here, yes. But there will always be more bad men, Piccola. That's why we have to stay watchful. That's why your community has to stay awake. And you'll help us?" He knelt one more time, this ritual that had become theirs. "You taught me something important. Power without purpose is just violence. For years I had power but no real purpose. Thank you for showing me the difference." Haley smiled that fearless smile that had changed everything and hugged him before running to join her friends. Luca stood, watching the children disappear into the school, and realized that the little girl who'd been too scared to walk 6 blocks alone had awakened something in him that decades of violence had buried. The ability to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down, to be the guardian his mother had died hoping he'd become. One act of courage, one simple request, one child brave enough to ask a monster for help. Sometimes that's all it takes to change everything. Subscribe, because courage knows no age, no social class, no boundaries, and sometimes the most unlikely guardian is exactly what innocence needs. The war for every child's safety has just begun, and heroes aren't always who you expect them to be.